greatest civil right you have is to stay alive. Staying alive and being free from random attack is a far more precious civil right than owning a gun.
A larger story about who we are as Americans and why are we the only Western industrialized country that doesn't have free universal health coverage. It's absolutely insane, I think. I know it's kind of a rough go for me, basically. Usually when I make a movie, I made one about General Motors about 17 years ago, and that film said that. But it took 17 years, and at the time, you know, people didn't listen and thought, how could you attack General Motors? They can do no wrong. And then, you know, I made Bowling for Columbine and tried to warn people about the easy access to guns and school shootings. Well, thank you for that. But here we just suffered through another tragic school shooting, and then of course Fahrenheit, where I went out on a limb and suggested that maybe we were sent to war for false reasons. And at the time, took a lot for that too, a lot of grief for that film. And so I'm hoping with this movie that maybe I can catch a break, and people will not just leap on me so quickly and say, you know, well, maybe we should at least listen to him this time. And I think just from the few screenings that we've had, I can tell that the audiences understand one basic thing, that illness and sickness doesn't know any kind of political stripe. This affects Democrats and Republicans, and we've got a huge greedy industry in this country, and there should be no room for greed when we're talking about people's health, and that has to be removed, and we've got to get rid of these profit-making insurance companies.
19 children and 2 teachers were shot dead in an elementary school in Texas in the city of Uvalde on Tuesday. The attack on the Robb Elementary School was carried out by an 18-year-old who attended Uvalde High School. Families have begun sharing the names of some of the victims. They include 9-year-old Uzziah Garcia, 10-year-old Amory Jo Garza, 10-year-old Jose Flores, 10-year-old Xavier Lopez, 10-year-old Annabelle Guadalupe Rodriguez, and 2 4th-grade teachers, Ava Morelos and Irma Garcia. Robb Elementary School is a school with about 600 students in just 3 grades, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. The school's about 90% Latinx. Thursday was scheduled to be the last day of class for the year. The school district superintendent, Hal Harrell, spoke Tuesday.
My heart was broken today. We're a small community, and we'll need your prayers to get us through this.
The gunman has been identified as Salvador Ramos. He reportedly bought at least one of his guns on his 18th birthday a few days ago. He was shot dead in the school. Earlier in the day, he shot and critically wounded his grandmother. Tuesday's attack was the deadliest school shooting since the massacre at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Connecticut, when a 20-year-old gunman shot dead 26 people, including 20 children between the ages of 6 and 7 in 2012. On Tuesday night, President Biden addressed the nation.
As a nation, we have to ask, when in God's name are we going to stand up to the gun lobby? When in God's name we do what we all know in our gut needs to be done?
The shooting in Uvalde came just 10 days after an 18-year-old self-described white supremacist attacked a grocery store in the heart of Buffalo's African-American community. He shot dead 10 people, all of whom were black. On Tuesday, a funeral was held for 65-year-old Celestine Chaney. Today, the Senate will hold a confirmation hearing for Stephen Dettelbach to head the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. The agency has been without a permanent leader for 7 years. In the past, Dettelbach has supported a federal assault weapons ban and universal background checks. Vigils were held in Uvalde, Texas, Wednesday, a day after an 18-year-old gunman shot and killed 19 students and 2 teachers at the Robb Elementary School. It was the deadliest school shooting in the United States in over a decade. All the victims were in the same fourth grade class. The White House says President Biden will visit Uvalde in the coming days. Meanwhile, chilling details have emerged about the events leading up to the massacre. Officials say the gunman lawfully purchased 2 semi-automatic assault rifles and up to 375 rounds of ammunition just last week after his 18th birthday. On Tuesday morning, he texted a teenage girl he'd befriended online in Germany, writing, "I'm going to shoot my grandmother." Then he wrote, "I just shot my grandma in her head," followed immediately by the message, "I'm a go shoot up a elementary school." Police say the gunman shot his way past an armed school security officer, then barricaded himself inside the school for over an hour, wounding 2 police officers before he was shot dead by a Border Patrol agent. Some parents report they tried to storm the school as they waited for police to respond, but were pushed back. The gunman was reportedly in that school between 40 minutes and an hour. On Wednesday, Texas gubernatorial candidate and former Democratic Congressmember Beto O'Rourke interrupted a press conference held by Texas Governor Greg Abbott in Uvalde. Video of the incident shows Beto approaching the stage and telling Abbott, "This is totally predictable when you choose not to do anything." Beto O'Rourke was shouted down by top Texas Republicans and escorted from the room by police. We'll play excerpts of that confrontation after headlines. Governor Abbott has declined to say whether he still plans to attend the National Rifle Association's 2022 annual meeting, which is set to open in Houston on Friday. Texas Republican Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick and Republican Senator Ted Cruz still plan to attend, as does former President Donald Trump. He'll be the headliner on Friday night. World leaders continue to react in horror to the latest mass shooting in the United States. At the Vatican, Pope Francis said Wednesday he's heartbroken by the massacre in Texas.
It is time to say enough to the indiscriminate trafficking of weapons. Let us all make a commitment. Let us all make a commitment so that tragedies like this cannot happen again.
Many people here in the UK feel a special bond with the US, and it's painful to see American children killed like this. But a lot of people I've spoken to here also say they're mystified, they're confused, because here and in other countries where there's been a massacre, the government brings in tougher gun control laws, and they cannot comprehend why that doesn't happen in the US.
16 young children and their teacher have been shot dead by a gunman at a primary school near Stirling.
In 1996, the United Kingdom was horrified by the murder of 5- and 6-year-old children by a lone shooter.
I just can't believe something like this has happened.
It was the deadliest mass shooting in British history. And after a grassroots campaign, the government here banned the private ownership of all handguns.
Good evening. All Australians tonight share the horror of the Port Arthur massacre.
In Australia, also in 1996, a lone gunman murdered 35 people. In response, the then Conservative Australian government banned nearly all semi-automatic rifles and shotguns and launched a program to buy back more than 600,000 weapons from those who already owned them.
The greatest civil right you have is to stay alive. Staying alive and being free from random attack is a far more precious civil right than owning a gun.
These are our most popular firearms.
In Australia in 2015, we found the nation's tough gun control laws widely popular, even with this gun shop owner.
I mean, if you were in America, you'd probably sell a lot more guns and make a lot more money.
Yeah, I suppose sometimes it's not all about the money.
From Columbine to Sandy Hook and Parkland, school shootings have broken the hearts of Americans, but there's been no major change to gun ownership laws in the US.
We've got a gun lobby and a corporate gun lobby that has its tentacles so deeply into our political process.
Dr. Jonathan Metzl is a sociologist who told us he's witnessed the gun lobby pressure US politicians into withholding support for tougher laws.
The lesson of those other countries is really that people came together across the political divide.
But were those countries able to do that because they don't have powerful gun lobbies?
100% yes. Definitely yes.
One of the Parkland survivors called out Senator Marco Rubio for taking campaign money from the NRA.
Senator Rubio, can you tell me right now that you will not accept a single donation from the NRA in the future?
And even that didn't change anything.
That people buy into my agenda. And I do support the Second Amendment.
But in New Zealand, another mass shooting in 2019, 51 people killed in 2 mosques, once again prompted legal change outside the US. A ban on military-style semi-automatic weapons and assault rifles. This week, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern explained how they did it.
Now, we have legitimate needs for guns in our country for things like pest control and to protect our biodiversity, but you don't need a military-style semi-automatic weapon to do that. And so we got rid of them.
Australia saw gun deaths plummet after its new laws came into effect. And here in the UK, there are so few guns on the streets that even the police don't generally carry firearms. And ladies, while in the US this year there's been more than 1 mass shooting a day on average, in other wealthy countries, they are extremely rare.
In Texas, anger is mounting over the police response to Tuesday's massacre at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, which left 19 children and 2 teachers dead. On Thursday, Victor Escalon of the Texas Department of Public Safety said there were no officers outside the school to confront the 18-year-old gunman, contradicting earlier accounts that a school resource officer unsuccessfully engaged the teen. Escalon also had few answers about the initial police response and why officers took over an hour to directly confront the shooter, even though scores of police officers were on the scene.
Once we interview all those officers, what they were thinking, what they did, why they did it, the video, the residual interviews, we'll have a better idea. Could anybody have gone there sooner?
One mother was handcuffed by a U.S. Marshal as she pleaded with officers to do more to help the students trapped inside the school. Another officer was seen holding a taser to keep angry parents at bay. One law enforcement official told a local news channel some officers went into the school to rescue their own children. Meanwhile, the husband of a 4th-grade teacher killed in Tuesday's massacre died Thursday of a heart attack. 50-year-old Joe Garcia had just returned home from dropping off flowers at a memorial for his wife, Irma Garcia, when he collapsed. Garcia's cousin wrote, "I truly believe Joe died of a broken heart." Joe and Irma Garcia were high school sweethearts who'd been married for a quarter of a century. They leave behind 4 children. In Toronto, Canada, 5 schools were placed on lockdown Thursday as police shot and killed a man seen carrying a rifle near an elementary school. Toronto Police Chief James Raymer wouldn't name the person killed, but described him as a young man in his late teens or early 20s.
Due to the proximity to a school, I certainly understand the trauma and how traumatic this must have been for staff, students, and parents, given the recent events that have happened in the United States.
Students at scores of schools across the United States walked out of classrooms at the stroke of noon Thursday in a coordinated protest demanding passage of gun control laws. In Michigan, hundreds of Oxford high school students assembled on their school's football field, forming a giant U in solidarity with victims of the massacre in Uvalde. 4 Oxford students were killed in November by a 15-year-old gunman. Data from the Centers for Disease Control shows firearms have surpassed motor vehicle crashes as the leading cause of death for children in the United States. On Capitol Hill, Senate Republicans used the threat of a filibuster Thursday to block a bill to combat neo-Nazi and white supremacist violence. 47 Republicans voted against ending debate on the Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act, which would create domestic terrorism offices within the FBI and the Departments of Justice and Homeland Security. This comes less than 2 weeks after a white supremacist gunman killed 10 African Americans at a grocery store in a predominantly black neighborhood of Buffalo, New York. On Thursday, the Senate adjourned for a 10-day recess after failing to take action on gun violence in the wake of the mass shootings in Buffalo and Uvalde, Texas. Democrats rallied outside the Capitol demanding gun control while rejecting Republican calls to arm teachers and school resource officers. This is California Senator Alex Padilla.
And no, putting more armed adults in schools is not the answer. If more guns was the answer, the United States of America would be the safest nation in the world, but it's not.
Texas Governor Greg Abbott has canceled plans to speak live at the annual convention of the National Rifle Association, which opens today in Houston, less than 300 miles from the site of Tuesday's massacre in Uvalde, but he will send a video. Two other prominent Texas Republicans, Senator John Cornyn and Congressmember Dan Crenshaw, also canceled plans to attend the NRA gathering, as have 4 music stars, Larry Gatlin, Larry Stewart, and Don McLean. Texas Republican Senator Ted Cruz and Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick still plan to attend, as does today's featured speaker, former President Donald Trump. The NRA says the Secret Service will prohibit guns inside the Houston Convention Center during Trump's speech.
Plus, we're also heavily militarized, and we exert that upon the world, and we're a bloated, dying empire that can only increase its military budget and provide nothing for its citizenry. And it's natural that if a country's dedicated to militarism, that trickles down to its citizenry regularly. And that's how they feel empowered, because that's how the country shows its power.
Yep. Good night, folks.
We are doomed.
I worked in the firearms industry. I didn't work directly for the NRA, but I worked in the industry that the NRA controlled. I was an executive for a very powerful firearms company. I worked in it for 25 years. I came to realize in the early 2000s that the industry in which I work was taking something that was wholesome to many Americans, a connection to guns and hunting, like I've done with my father and still do with my boys. And they're twisting it into something that was very nefarious and is now ripping the country apart. So I spent the last 15 or 16 years of my career trying to hold true to those old principles at the company I work for, and then trying to tear down the NRA from the inside, because I worried that we were headed towards a place like this. Well, the NRA, many people ask me, why is this so hard? Why can't we get something fixed? What is going on? And it has a lot to do with the AR-15. The AR-15 is many things. It is most of all now a political symbol of intimidation on the right. So it's very deeply entwined in the very identity of the political right and the GOP. And it's also a profit center. It has made fortunes. As late as 15 years ago, the gun wasn't even hardly displayed. It wasn't even shown at industry trade shows. It was persona non grata. But as the NRA cranked up the rhetoric machine, it needed a symbol, and the firearms industry needed profit, and the AR-15 became that. And so it's many things. And the reason it's so hard to address, and why the gun issue is so hard to address, is because the politics of the NRA and the AR-15 are the politics of our country. So one of the most important, simple things that appears to correct guns, a policy where a lot of people seem to agree, is also just deeply integral to our politics. So we're tackling our entire political system when we attack the guns. I ask you to go back to January 6, 2021, if you can. There were a couple different types of flags there. There were Trump and political flags. And the other type of flag was the come and take it AR-15 flag. You saw guns on lots of flags. When reporters asked the people at the event what they were there, they often said something about politics and then instantly went to guns. The Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys, the 3 Percenters, the leading domestic terrorism groups in the country, all centered around gun rights. So the AR-15 is deeply emblematic of the very political radicalization and identity on the right. And if I live in Red America, if you drive around the towns of Red America, you're going to see a lot of Trump stickers. And on almost every one of those trucks or cars where you see Trump stickers, you're going to see AR-15 stickers. Why? Because the AR-15 has become the symbol of the American right. The last time the NRA put profit and politics aside was in the few weeks after President John Kennedy was killed. I was not alive then. So that's been a long time. Now what you're going to see, as has been the case with every mass shooting since 1999, since Columbine, you're going to see a period of relative silence, although they had the convention in Houston last week. And then you're going to see something very important start to develop, which is necessary for the radicalization and the power of the NRA. Once they're being attacked or threatened, or legislation is being proposed, they will crank up the fear machine, because they will say, because being a victim is a big part of political radicalization. So the NRA will then start to tell their members, we are the victim. Those people are using the death of those kids to take your constitutional rights. Now it's more important for you to stand up than ever. And I don't go so far as to think that anybody at the NRA or anybody that's associated ever wants any kids to die. I will go so far as to say they will quickly pivot and use the proposed legislation and supposed victimization, which I have big air quotes around that, as a way to gin up their base. That certainly will happen. And that's what has to happen. And people like me have to kick down the door and say it will happen. And I believe if we don't do it, this endangers our democracy from several angles. What kid is free who is not free to go to school? Come on. There's nothing free about that. And so this idea, this silliness, this craziness that we are defending freedom by imposing restrictions that make it marginally more difficult for a kid to get a powerful AR-15 and kill those people. It's craziness. And responsible gun owners, I know that they know this. They have been shouted down, though. They have been told to stay quiet. They have been trolled. They have been marginalized. I know, because I spoke out and I took the heat for 15 years. They came after me. They ran friends of mine out of the business. They make it very, very clear, you never speak ill of the NRA, especially in times like this, because, quote unquote, they're standing up for everybody. But now, after the launch of my book, responsible gun owners, like hundreds of them, thousands of them, are calling me and texting me and direct messaging me saying, I've had enough. I can't take it anymore. I'm a gun owner. I'm like, okay, now's your time. Now we stand up. We have to do this or the country's not going to exist. Well, what the NRA will say is, well, if that kid is old enough to go to war or that kid is old enough to vote, well, he's old enough to have exercise his constitutional rights. And my answer to that is, look, every right must be balanced with decency and responsibility. There is no unfettered right, even all of the rights that are specifically enumerated in the Constitution, speech, religion, I could go on and on and on. None of them are unfettered. And so this idea that by strictly placing decency and responsibility in the form of regulation and norms around a right is somehow unconstitutional and unpatriotic, well, that is craziness, and it is leading us into these horrible places. Nobody can look at what you're showing on the screen now. Those poor kids and families and the town of Uvalde. My God, stand up. And responsible gun owners know this. They just need to be nudged. And I'm sad that it takes this, but maybe this will nudge them. Maybe my book will nudge them. It has to be done.
Before I get into the analytical piece of this, let me just say, our youngest daughter graduated high school this week, and it is not lost on me that in, 8 years, there are going to be 19 families in Uvalde who should be celebrating the same way that we were, who we're not going to get to. And the reason they're not going to get to is because this country loves its guns more than it loves its children. This country loves the ability of an 18-year-old, the day they turn 18, to go buy a weapon of war, than they appreciate the right of a 10-year-old to become 11. or 12 or 13 or 18. So let's be very clear. The difference between Canada and the United States, Australia and the United States, New Zealand and the United States, every industrialized nation in the world versus us is that we fetishize weapons. And let's be very clear. The historical precedent for that, the reason that we are so obsessed with guns and personal gun ownership going back to the Second Amendment is because the founders were so afraid that Black people were going to rebel against enslavement, that indigenous people were going to rebel against being pushed off their land and killed and removed, that we wanted to make sure white men could have all the guns that they could possibly possess in order to put down the rebellions of the dangerous racial other. And so the irony is that we now have an incredibly dangerous country for everybody's babies, white babies, Black babies, brown babies, everybody's babies, because white men a couple hundred years ago decided we needed to have all the weapons that we could possibly have and enshrine that in the Constitution to defend against those people. And the irony is that now white folks, white children, white families, just as endangered. We buy all these weapons. In the wake of Obama's election, there was a big upsurge in weapons because folks were, oh, Black dude's the president and they're going to come take our guns. After Ferguson, when Mike Brown was killed, the Ferguson uprising, everyone said, we got to go get all these guns. And the irony is that that increase in gun ownership did not lead to self-defensive use of weapons to prevent, burglaries or whatever. It led to an increase in suicide, an increase in homicide. We are a less safe nation for everybody's babies because of this obsession. And this obsession goes back hundreds of years. So we need to understand the connection between past and present and realize that we are a sick and broken culture. We are not the greatest nation on earth any longer. If we ever were, we are a nation committed to an ideology of death. And if we want to stop that and save our children, we are going to make a change. And I mean, children, students should be walking out of school in the fall, refuse to go to class until your parents and your grandparents do something to protect you. Your parents do not love you enough. Your leaders do not love you enough, and you shouldn't go to class one day until they decide to do something different. A general strike among young people is what is going to end this thing, and it may be the only thing that does that.
The greatest civil right you have is to stay alive. Staying alive and being free from random attack is a far more precious civil right than owning a gun.